They sent her a mysterious suitcase from her past. No return address, no explanation. Just her name, written in a handwriting that looked like it came from another lifetime. At first, Ava Mitchell thought it was a mistake, until she opened it and found photos of herself as a child, moments she had no memory of ever living. Letters addressed to her, but never sent. A map marking places she had never been. And a truth so dangerous, someone had spent decades trying to bury it. This wasn't just a suitcase. It was a message, a warning, and the beginning of a story that would change everything she believed about her past, her mother, and herself. If you believe the past never stays buried, hit subscribe right now because this story will leave you speechless. Ava Mitchell, a 26-year-old woman, lived a quiet and almost invisible life in a narrow apartment tucked between two aging buildings on the outskirts of Chicago. By day, she worked at a small, dusty bookstore where time seemed to stand still, shelving forgotten novels, ringing up the same handful of customers and losing herself in stories that were never her own. But behind her calm routine was a silence that weighed heavily on her. Ava had been adopted as a child, and every question she had ever asked about her real family had been met with the same uncomfortable pause. And then nothing. No names, no history, no answers. Just a blank space where her past should have been. Some nights, she would sit by her window, watching strangers pass under the dim streetlights, wondering if any of them shared her blood, her story, her truth. To Ava, her past wasn't just unknown. It felt deliberately erased, like a door that hadn't just been closed but locked, hidden, and meant to never be opened again. The morning it happened felt no different from any other. Ava woke up to the soft hum of traffic below her apartment window and the distant wail of a siren echoing through the city. The sky outside was gray, heavy with the promise of rain, typical Chicago. She moved through her routine on autopilot, coffee brewing. Toast slightly burned. The quiet shuffle of socks across cold wooden floors. Nothing about that morning suggested her life was about to change. It wasn't until she was about to leave for work that she noticed it. A shape, right outside her door. At first, she thought it was one of her neighbor's packages, maybe, something delivered to the wrong apartment again. That happened all the time in her building. But as she opened the door, the hinges creaking softly, her eyes settled on it, and something immediately felt off. It wasn't a cardboard box. It was a suitcase. Old, not just slightly worn, but aged like it had been pulled out of another decade and left there on purpose. The leather was cracked. Its once rich brown now faded into a dull, uneven shade. The metal corners were scratched and tarnished, and one of the clasps looked like it had been repaired more than once. Ava froze in the doorway. Her first instinct wasn't curiosity. It was unease. Slowly, she stepped closer. There was no shipping label, no barcode, no courier sticker, nothing to indicate how it had gotten there or who had brought it. Just one thing. Her name, Ava Mitchell, written by hand. Her breath caught. The letters weren't printed or scribbled casually. They were carefully formed, elegant, almost artistic. The kind of handwriting you don't see anymore. Each curve and line felt intentional, deliberate, old-fashioned. It didn't look like it belonged in 2026. It looked like it had been written decades ago. A strange chill ran down her spine. For a moment, she just stared at it, her heart beginning to beat faster without explanation. "Okay," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "This is weird." Her mind raced through possibilities. A mistake, a prank, some kind of delivery gone wrong. But none of it made sense, because no one, No one knew her past well enough to send something like this. She didn't even know it herself. Ava knelt down slowly, her fingers hovering just above the worn leather handle. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave it there, to walk away, to go to work and pretend she hadn't seen it. But something deeper, something quieter, more persistent pulled her closer, a feeling she couldn't explain. Like this suitcase had been waiting for her. Her fingers finally touched the handle. It was cold, not just from the morning air cold in a way that felt unnatural, as if it had been sitting in the shadows for far longer than it should have. She swallowed hard and lifted it, heavier than she expected. There was something inside, something solid. Her pulse quickened. Ava stepped back into her apartment, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The familiar space suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were leaning into watch. She set the suitcase down on her small kitchen table. For a long moment, she didn't move, just stared at it. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder. Tick, 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 each second stretching longer than the last. "Don't be ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, trying to steady herself. It was just a suitcase, just an object. And yet, it didn't feel like one. It felt like a message. Ava reached forward, her hands trembling slightly as she brushed away a thin layer of dust from the surface. That's when she noticed something else, scratched faintly into the leather, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. A symbol, small, almost hidden. A shape she didn't recognize, but something about it stirred a strange sense of familiarity deep inside her chest. Her breath became shallow. Why does this feel familiar? She didn't have an answer, and that scared her more than anything. Slowly, she moved her fingers to the clasps. They were stiff, resisting her touch at first, as if they hadn't been opened in years. Or maybe they weren't meant to be opened at all. Ava hesitated again. This was the moment, the point of no return. Whatever was inside that suitcase, whatever had been sent to her from a past she couldn't remember, it was about to step into her present. And once it did, there would be no going back. Her hands tightened. Click. The first clasp snapped open. Her heart jumped. Click. The second followed. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. Ava slowly lifted the lid, and in that moment, her life, the one she thought she understood, the one she had carefully built on silence and unanswered questions, began to unravel. The lid opened slowly, and for a second, Ava didn't breathe. The inside of the suitcase wasn't empty. It was organized, carefully, deliberately, like someone had packed it with purpose, every item placed exactly where it was meant to be. At the very top sat an old film camera. Ava stared at it. It was vintage black metal, slightly worn, the kind of camera she had only ever seen in antique stores or old movies. The leather grip was smooth from years of use, and a thin strap, cracked with age, was wrapped neatly beside it. She reached out slowly, almost afraid to touch it, the moment her fingers brushed against the camera. A strange sensation flickered through her chest. Not pain, not fear, something else. Recognition. She quickly pulled her hand back, her heart starting to race. "That's impossible," she whispered. She had never seen this camera before. At least, she didn't think she had. Swallowing hard, Ava forced herself to keep going. Beneath the camera were dozens of small cylindrical containers, film rolls. So many of them, carefully labeled with dates. But the dates didn't make sense. They stretched back over 2 decades, some even older than she was. Her fingers trembled as she picked one up, turning it under the light. Who would keep this many undeveloped photos? And more importantly, why send them to her? Her chest tightened. There was more. Stacked neatly to one side were letters. Bundles of them, tied together with faded string. The paper had yellowed with time, the edges soft and worn. They looked fragile, like they might fall apart if handled too roughly. Ava picked up the top bundle, her pulse pounding in her ears. None of the envelopes had stamps. None had been sealed. They were never sent. Her name was written on every single one, in the same elegant, old-fashioned handwriting from the outside of the suitcase. Ava felt her throat go dry. Who wrote these? She didn't open them. Not yet. Something inside her wasn't ready. Not after what she'd already seen. Instead, her eyes moved to the bottom of the suitcase. A folded map. She pulled it out carefully and spread it across the table. It was a map of the United States. Old, slightly torn at the edges, marked with red circles and handwritten notes. Locations scattered across the country: Montana, Arizona, Louisiana, upstate New York. Lines drawn between them, like a path, a route, a journey. Ava stared at it, her mind spinning. What was this? A road trip? A trail? Or something else? Her breathing became uneven, because deep down she already knew. This wasn't random. None of this was random. Every piece inside this suitcase was connected, and somehow it was all connected to her. Her hands shook as she reached for the last item, a small stack of photographs, already developed. Unlike the film rolls, these had been printed, seen, chosen. Her fingers hesitated before lifting the top photo. Then slowly, she turned it over, and everything inside her shattered. It was her, a little girl, no older than 5, standing in front of a small roadside motel, her hair shorter, her face softer, but it was unmistakably her. Ava's breath caught violently in her chest. No, her voice cracked. That's not. But it was. There was no doubt. She flipped to the next photo. Again, her. This time sitting on the hood of an old car, laughing as if she didn't have a care in the world. Ava staggered back slightly, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. I don't remember this. Her voice was shaking now, panic creeping in. She flipped another and another, each one showing fragments of a life she had never known. Different places, different clothes, different moments, but always the same girl, always her. And in some of the photos, there was someone else, never fully visible. A shadow, a reflection in a window, a figure just outside the frame, watching, present but hidden. Ava's heart began pounding uncontrollably. Who took these? Her hands moved faster now, flipping through the images in a desperate frenzy, searching for answers, searching for something, anything that made sense. Then she found it. One photo that made her freeze completely. It showed her as a child, standing beside a woman, the woman's face partially turned away, obscured by light. But her hand was resting gently on Ava's shoulder, protective, familiar. Ava's vision blurred. Her chest tightened painfully, because somehow, without seeing her face, she knew, deep down, in a place she had buried her entire life. She knew exactly who that woman was. Her knees felt weak. That's my mother. The word barely escaped her lips. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too real. Everything she believed about her past, gone, destroyed in seconds. These weren't random photos. This wasn't a mistake. This was proof. Proof that her life was not what she had been told. Not even close. Ava slowly looked back at the suitcase. At the letters, the film, the map, the camera. It wasn't just a collection of objects. It was a story. A hidden one. A story someone had tried to preserve, and someone else had tried to erase. Her breathing slowed, but her eyes changed. Fear was still there, but something else had taken its place. Something stronger. Determination. Because now, for the first time in her life, Ava wasn't just wondering about her past anymore. She was staring directly at it, and it was staring back. Waiting for her to uncover the truth. Ava didn't realize she'd been crying until a tear hit the photograph in her hand. It blurred the image her small, smiling face beside the woman she now believed was her mother. Her real mother, slowly, almost fearfully. Ava reached for the stack of letters again. Her hands were no longer just trembling from shock. They were trembling from something deeper. Hope, and fear of what that hope might reveal. She untied the faded string around the first bundle. The paper felt fragile, like it had been waiting years, decades to be touched. The top letter was dated 21 years ago. Ava's breath caught. That was around the time she had been adopted. Her fingers hesitated at the edge of the paper. Then she unfolded it. My dearest Ava. The words hit her instantly. Not formal, not distant, not like something written to a stranger. It was warm, intimate, like it had always belonged to her. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to believe that one day you will. Ava pressed her lips together, her chest tightening. Line by line, she read, and with every word, the version of her life she had believed in began to crack. I'm so sorry for the life I've forced you into, but it's the only way I can keep you safe. Safe. Ava frowned, her heartbeat quickening. I know one day they will tell you I abandoned you, that I disappeared, that I chose to leave. Her hands clenched the paper tighter. That's not the truth. The room felt like it tilted. I didn't leave you because I didn't love you. I left because I loved you too much to let them find you. Ava's breath hitched sharply. Them? Who was them? Her eyes moved faster now, scanning the words. Desperate. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Through my camera. Something powerful people would do anything to keep hidden. Her pulse roared in her ears. The camera. The photos. It all connected. They started following me, watching us, waiting for a moment of weakness. Ava's chest tightened painfully. Images flashed in her mind. The photos. The shadowy figure in the background. The feeling of being watched. They weren't just after me anymore. They knew about you. Ava stopped breathing. They said if I didn't give them what I had, they would take you instead. Her hand flew to her mouth. A quiet, broken sound escaped her throat. No. Suddenly, everything she had believed about her childhood. The adoption. The silence. The missing history. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't abandonment. It was protection. Her vision blurred again as she kept reading. I had to make a choice no mother should ever have to make. The words felt heavier now. I could keep you with me and risk losing you forever. Or I could disappear and give you a chance to live a normal life. Ava shook her head slowly, tears falling freely now. No. But the truth was already settling in. Deep. Unavoidable. I chose your life over my presence. That sentence shattered her. Completely. Everything she had carried for years. The quiet belief that she wasn't wanted, that she had been left behind, collapsed in an instant, replaced by something far more painful and far more powerful. Love A fierce, unimaginable kind of love. The kind that sacrifices everything, even being remembered. Ava pressed the letter against her chest, her shoulders shaking. She didn't leave me. Her voice broke. She saved me. The realization hit like a tidal wave. All those empty years, all those unanswered questions, all that silence. It wasn't because no one cared. It was because someone cared too much. Ava wiped her tears, forcing herself to continue reading. I kept moving, changing cities, never staying too long. Every photo I took, every place we went, I documented it for you. Her eyes flickered to the suitcase. The map, the film, the photos. This wasn't random. This was a record, a story, a trail left behind intentionally. I knew I might not make it out of this. So I made sure one day you could find the truth. Ava's heart pounded. Find the truth. That's what this was. The suitcase wasn't just a memory. It was a message, a roadmap, a final act of love. I sent this to you when I knew it was time, when I knew they had stopped looking. Ava froze, stopped looking. Her eyes widened slightly. Was that true? Or was she still in danger? Her breath became shallow again. But something inside her had already changed. The fear that once told her to run, to avoid the unknown, was fading. Replacing it was something stronger. Clarity, purpose, and a burning need for answers. She looked back down at the final lines of the letter. If you're reading this, it means you're strong enough now. Ava's grip tightened, stronger than I ever was. Her tears slowed, her breathing steadied, and for the first time since opening the suitcase, she didn't feel lost. She felt awakened. I'm so proud of you, my brave girl. Ava closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. Then finally, she looked back up, at the map, at the camera, at the path laid out before her. This wasn't just her mother's story anymore. It was hers now, and everything she thought she knew about herself, her identity, her past, her place in the world, had just been rewritten, completely. Ava took a slow, steady breath and whispered, I'm going to find out the truth. The next morning, Ava didn't go to work. For the first time in years, she didn't follow her routine. The bookstore, the quiet shelves, the predictable hours, none of it mattered anymore. Because sitting on her kitchen table was something far more important than routine. The truth, and a path leading straight into it. Ava stood in front of the map again, her eyes scanning the red circles and connecting lines. It wasn't random. It was a route, a carefully planned journey. Her mother's journey, and now hers. She picked up the first film roll, the one with the earliest date, and slipped it into her bag along with the camera. Then she grabbed her jacket, hesitating only for a second before walking out the door. No plan, no certainty, just a direction. The first stop was a small town in southern Illinois. Quiet, almost forgotten. The kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen, which made it the perfect place to hide something. Ava found a small photography shop tucked between a laundromat and a diner. The sign outside was faded, barely readable. Inside, the smell of chemicals and old paper filled the air. An elderly man stood behind the counter, glancing up as she walked in. "Can I help you?" he asked. Ava hesitated, then held up the film roll. "I need this developed." The man examined it briefly, his expression shifting slightly. "Where'd you get this?" Ava's heart skipped. "Does it matter?" He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Come back in an hour." That hour felt like a lifetime. Ava sat in the diner next door, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Her mind raced with possibilities. What if this was all a mistake? What if the photos meant nothing? Or worse, what if they meant everything? When she returned, the man handed her a thick envelope without a word. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Photo after photo slid into her hands. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Buildings, streets, people walking. But then she noticed it. Patterns. The same black SUV appearing in multiple shots. The same man in a suit, always slightly out of focus, always in the background. Watching. Waiting. Ava's pulse quickened. "These aren't random," she whispered. The man behind the counter nodded quietly. "No," he said. "They're not." She looked up at him sharply. "You recognize this." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out an old newspaper clipping. He slid it across to her. A headline stared back at her. Whistleblower vanishes. After attempting to expose corporate scandal, Ava's stomach dropped. The article mentioned a network of shell companies, land deals, and powerful figures operating behind closed doors. And one name. It kept appearing. A name her mother had circled in red ink on the map. Ava's chest tightened. This is real. That was just the beginning. Each location on the map told another piece of the story. In Missouri, she found a motel owner who remembered a woman with a camera always taking photos, always asking questions. She knew too much, he told Ava quietly. I warned her. In Colorado, she uncovered a storage unit registered under a fake name. Inside were copies of documents, transactions, land purchases, coded records that pointed to something much bigger than she had imagined. And in Arizona, she found fear, a man who refused to speak once he saw the photos. You need to stop, he told her, his voice low and urgent. They don't forget. They don't forgive. Ava felt the weight of his words, felt the danger pressing closer. But she didn't stop. She couldn't, because now she understood something she hadn't before. Her mother hadn't just been running. She had been collecting evidence, building a case, piece by piece, risking everything. One night, alone in a cheap roadside motel, Ava spread everything out across the bed. The photos, the documents, the map, the letters. It all connected now, clearer than ever. This wasn't just a story about survival. It was about exposure, about truth. Her mother had uncovered a network, a powerful group hiding behind legitimate businesses, real estate, development, investments. But beneath it all, corruption, extortion, disappearance, and worse. Ava stared at the final marked location on the map. New York, circled twice, underlined. That was the end of the trail, the place where her mother's journey had stopped, and where Ava's would truly begin. She sat there in silence for a long moment. The fear was still there. It hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown. But it was no longer stronger than her, because now she had something she had never had before. Purpose, a reason to keep going, a reason to fight. Ava slowly gathered the evidence, placing it back into the suitcase. But this time, it didn't feel like she was carrying someone else's burden. It felt like she was carrying a legacy. Her mother's truth, her mother's fight, now her responsibility. Ava looked at her reflection in the dark motel window. She didn't see the same woman anymore. The quiet girl who avoided questions, who lived safely in the unknown, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone ready, someone unafraid to face what came next. She took a deep breath and whispered, I'm not running anymore. The road had changed her. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic, cinematic moment, but slowly, quietly, with every mile she traveled, every truth she uncovered, every fear she chose not to run from. Ava Mitchell was no longer the woman who had stood frozen in her apartment, afraid to open a suitcase. That version of her felt distant now, almost like a stranger. It started with small things. At first, she used to double-check the locks on her motel doors 3 times before going to sleep. She kept the lights on, jumped at every sound in the hallway. But over time, that fear began to shift. Not disappear, but transform into awareness, into control. Instead of hiding from the unknown, Ava started preparing for it. She began organizing the evidence more carefully, labeling photos, cross-referencing locations, matching dates from the letters to the images she had developed. The chaos that once overwhelmed her became a pattern she could understand. And once she understood it, she could fight it. One night, in a quiet motel room just outside Denver, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by everything her mother had left behind. The suitcase was open, but it no longer felt like something mysterious. It felt familiar, like it belonged to her. She picked up the old camera again. This time, her hands didn't hesitate. Didn't shake. She turned it over, studying it closely. The weight, the texture, the worn edges shaped by years of use. Then slowly, she raised it to her eye and looked through the lens. The world shifted instantly. Focused, framed, clear. Ava blinked, startled. For a moment, it felt like she was seeing things the way her mother once had. Not just observing, but searching, looking for details others would miss, looking for truth hidden in plain sight. Her breath slowed. "This is how she saw the world," she whispered. And in that moment, something clicked. This wasn't just her mother's tool. It was her perspective, her way of fighting back. Ava lowered the camera slowly, then stood up and made a decision. The next day, she returned to one of the locations from the map. But this time, she didn't go as a confused daughter searching for answers. She went as someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. She walked with purpose, watched people, noticed patterns, the same way her mother had, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was following a trail. She felt like she was continuing it. The real shift came when she was confronted. It happened outside a small office building in New Mexico. Ava had just finished photographing the location, matching it with one of her mother's images when she felt it. That same feeling from the photos. Being watched. She turned slowly, and there he was, a man in a dark suit, standing too still, looking directly at her. Her heart skipped. For a split second, the old Ava came back. The one who would have looked away, walked faster, pretended nothing was wrong. But this time, she didn't move. She held his gaze, steady, unflinching. The man tilted his head slightly, as if surprised. Then, after a long moment, he turned and walked away. Ava exhaled slowly, her pulse racing. But she didn't feel weak. She didn't feel scared. She felt strong, because she hadn't run. That night, sitting alone again, Ava replayed the moment in her mind. She realized something important. The fear hadn't disappeared. It had just lost control over her. And that changed everything. The suitcase was no longer just a mystery from her past. It had become something else entirely. A guide, a compass, every item inside it, the letters, the photos, the camera, the map, They weren't just clues. They were lessons. Pieces of a life her mother had lived, a strength her mother had built. And now, a strength Ava was inheriting. She looked at her reflection again that night. But this time, she didn't see uncertainty. She didn't see someone incomplete. She saw someone becoming whole. Someone who finally understood where she came from. Not just in blood, but in spirit. "I'm not lost anymore," she said quietly. And for the first time, she meant it. Ava picked up the suitcase and closed it gently. Not as someone overwhelmed by its contents, but as someone ready to carry it forward, because this wasn't just her mother's story anymore. It wasn't even just about the truth hidden in those photos. It was about identity, about reclaiming something that had been taken from her before she even had the chance to understand it. And now, she did. Ava Mitchell wasn't just a quiet girl from Chicago anymore. She was the daughter of a woman who had risked everything to expose the truth. And now, she was ready to finish what her mother started. New York, the final circle on the map, the place where everything ended, and where everything would begin again. Ava stood across the street from an old, abandoned building on the Lower East Side. It didn't look like much, just another forgotten structure squeezed between modern glass towers and busy sidewalks. But according to the map, this was it. The last place her mother had marked. The end of the trail. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer. Every instinct told her this place mattered. Not just because it was the final stop, but because something had been left here. For her, inside, the building smelled of dust and time. Broken tiles, faded walls, echoes of footsteps bouncing through empty hallways. Ava moved, turning her senses sharp, alert, focused, just like her mother had been. She followed the final note written on the map. Top floor, last door. Each step up the stairs felt heavier than the last, until finally, she reached it. A single door, slightly ajar, waiting. Ava pushed it open. The room was small, bare, but not empty. In the center, a chair, and on it, a small tape recorder. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, her hands steady now. No hesitation, no fear, just knowing this was it. The final message. From her mother to her. Ava pressed play. Static filled the room for a moment. Then, a voice. Soft, tired, but unmistakably strong. Ava. Ava's knees nearly gave out. That voice. It was real. Not imagined. Not written on paper. Real. If you're hearing this, it means you found the end of the trail. Ava's eyes filled with tears instantly. Her hand tightened around the recorder. "I always hoped you would." A small, broken smile formed through her tears. "Of course I did," she whispered. "I didn't send the suitcase to give you answers," her mother continued. "I sent it to give you a choice." Ava froze. A choice. "I knew that if you opened it, really opened it, you wouldn't be able to walk away." Ava let out a shaky breath. She was right. There are things in that suitcase that people would do anything to keep buried. The room felt colder, heavier. I tried to expose them, but I ran out of time. Ava closed her eyes. Pain washed over her. Not just grief, but understanding. Deep, painful understanding. "So I did the only thing I could." The voice continued softly. "I left the truth with you." Ava's grip tightened. Her breathing steadied. "I didn't know if you would choose to ignore it or to fight." A pause. Then, "But if you're here, standing where I once stood," her voice softened. "I think I already know your answer." Ava's tears fell freely now. "Yeah," she whispered. "You were never meant to carry this alone," her mother said gently. "But you were always meant to be strong enough to choose what to do with it." Ava straightened slowly, her shoulders no longer heavy with doubt, but grounded in purpose. "This is your moment now." The final words echoed in the quiet room. "Be brave, my daughter." Kulik. The tape ended. Silence. But it didn't feel empty. It felt complete. Ava stood there, tears drying on her cheeks. The fear that once followed her, gone, replaced by something unshakable. Clarity, resolve, truth. Hours later, Ava stood in front of a different building. Glass, steel, lights, the exact opposite of where she had just been. A news station. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass doors. Not the same woman who had received a suitcase weeks ago. Not even close. She took a deep breath and walked inside. What followed changed everything. The photos, the recordings, the documents, all of it. Handed over, verified, investigated, and then exposed. The story spread fast. Headlines, broadcasts, names that had once been untouchable, dragged into the light. The network her mother had uncovered collapsed piece by piece because one woman had refused to stay silent, and another had chosen to finish what she started. Weeks later, Ava stood alone again. This time, not in fear, not in confusion, but in peace. She held the camera in her hands, lifting it slowly to capture the city skyline at sunset. Click. For the first time, she wasn't looking for answers anymore. She had become part of the truth. They said the suitcase would change everything. She murmured softly, looking out at the world below. They were right. Some truths don't disappear just because they're hidden. They wait, quietly, patiently, for the moment we are strong enough to face them. Ava spent her entire life believing her past was something empty, something abandoned. But the truth was far more powerful. It wasn't emptiness, it was protection. It wasn't silence, it was sacrifice. The past isn't always something that holds us back. Sometimes, it's the very thing that sets us free. Because when we finally confront it, when we stop running and start understanding, we begin to see who we really are. Not the version shaped by fear or assumptions, but the one built on truth. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it doesn't stay. Sometimes it disappears. Sometimes it hurts. But that doesn't mean it was never there. Real love, deep, selfless love can exist even in absence, even in silence, even across time. If this story touched you, if you've ever questioned your past, your family, or your identity, hit subscribe and become part of a community that believes every hidden story deserves to be told. And tell me in the comments, what is something from your past you've never had the courage to face